Hi, my name is Marty Pennington, and I am the Financial Wellness Counselor here at the University of Toledo. Today, what we're going to be talking about together is managing your money. And I know that's one of those topics that some people hear, they love the idea of it, whereas others, they hear anything that has anything to do with money and they kind of just cringe at what might come next. My hope is that everything that we kind of cover today is something that will be beneficial for you the immediate future as well as down the road, and you all can kind of take something of value away just to be able to input in your everyday lives going forward. So with that being said, I do think it's important to acknowledge that I understand some people are really passionate and they're really knowledgeable on things to do with money, but there's also people who are the opposite and they don't know where to start. So maybe you fall into one of those categories, or maybe you're somewhere else on the spectrum. I'm glad that you're tuning in and hoping to learn a little bit more. And just remember that at the end of the day, everything that we're going to talk about, it's just a suggestion at the end of the day. They're just tips. For some people, it works. For some people, it doesn't. It's just kind of trying to find what works best for you and trying to make smart decisions kind of going forward. So what is financial wellness? When you hear that word, I think there's a lot of people that are like, I don't really know what that means. I would be one of those people just a couple years ago before I started in this role. I think when I like to break it down, I like to think of health with people. So we think of physical health, we think of mental health, but there's also that financial health piece. When we, look below that then, so when we define it, it's having the knowledge, the ability, and desire to make smart financial decisions. What I love about that definition is, it's one thing to know how to do it, it's one thing to be able to do it, and it's one thing to want to do it. But unless you can do all three of those things at the same time, it's really tough to be able to make smart financial decisions. I think that's the hope for us, is that as we meet people, as we work with them, we want people leaving feeling like they know how to do it, they're able to do it, and they want to do it, and they're going to be able to do all three of those at the same time. They're going to be able to make smart financial decisions going forward. Whatever it is that they're trying to accomplish, that they feel just a little bit more empowered to be able to make that a reality for them going forward. What I think is one of the most critical parts of financial wellness is being able to establish goals. So being able to try to improve your financial wellness and that footing that you have, I think a really good starting point is be able to establish and hopefully achieve financial goals. So when we think of it, goals are going to give your money a purpose. If you don't take the time to establish goals for your money, I think at the end of the day, you're setting yourself up to be just a little bit more likely to fail, because your money's not, being put to hopefully as good of use as it could be. So being able to say, hey, I want to accomplish this goal with my money, and here's what I'm going to do to be able to accomplish that. And I think if you don't take those steps, if you don't think it through, that's where a lot of people get themselves into trouble, is because they aren't thinking through all the different possibilities and all the different ways that they could be putting their money to use to help them accomplish whatever it is that they're trying to accomplish. I always like to point out that there's a difference between short-term goals and long-term goals. And that's in general, but especially when we're talking about money as well. It's going to depend on the stage of life that you're in, the amount of money you have coming in. There's so many different variables that are going to affect it. But I think it's good to establish both sets of goals. So trying to have focus on things that are in the near future, while also keeping your eye off in the horizon to make sure that those goals that you're accomplishing today, in a few weeks, in a few months, those are also going to put you in a relatively good position in the future as well. So trying to keep that type of thing in mind. So when we think of different goals, that could be something like establishing an emergency fund, which we'll talk about here in a second. Maybe it's I want to save up to be able to get a better car, or I want to save up for a trip, or I want to save up for my education, or I just want to save up to be able to afford and be able to manage everyday bills and such. I think there's no good or bad goals. At the end of the day, it's whatever you value, whatever you want to be able to use your money for. If you can position yourself to be able to do it, I think that's fantastic, and I would encourage everyone to make sure that they take the time to establish their goals and take the time to think through what it is that they want to accomplish with their money. Because again, not establishing goals for your money is not a great idea, and that's going to set yourself up to make it a lot more difficult to achieve whatever financial reality that you are trying to make for yourself. Now, the one goal that I typically recommend students, or just people in general, start off with is an emergency fund. So emergency fund is a cash reserve that's set aside specifically for unplanned expenses and financial emergencies. I wish that I could say that nothing bad would ever happen to any of us, so we would never have to spend money that we weren't planning on spending. But unfortunately, we all know that that's not how life works. So that's where an emergency fund comes in. Typically speaking, what's recommended is that people should have 3 to 6 months worth of expenses set aside for an emergency. Now, keep in mind that's expenses, that's not income. So when we say 3 to 6 months of expenses, that means just the amount of money that you are committed to having to spend, not the amount of money that you have coming in from your paycheck necessarily. If that is a similar amount, or if it's more, then that's a whole nother discussion. But that's what we'll talk about here shortly as well. I understand that, you see that's 3 to 6 months worth, and you're like, oh, that's probably quite a bit of money. This isn't something that's going to happen overnight. And maybe at this stage of your life, it's not achievable to have 3 to 6 months worth saved up. But this is just something to keep in the back of your mind, that way when you are graduating, when you do have a job, this is a good goal to start off with, and to try and continue to work towards. If 3 to 6 months isn't feasible right now, I think what's a really good goal to try and accomplish is say, I just want to have $1,000 set aside that I can use in the case of emergency. So maybe you have medical bills, or maybe you get a parking ticket or a car accident, or just something that you weren't thinking of that pops up and it's an emergency and you have to pay it. That's what you would tap into. Now, when I point out that there's plenty of things that would not count as an emergency, and we want to stay away from those. So, feeling like, okay, my wardrobe's kind of outdated, I need some new clothes. That's not an emergency. Maybe it's, I really don't like this old car that I'm driving. I kind of think I want to upgrade, even though this one I'm driving functions well. It's just I want something nicer, newer, cooler, not an emergency. So just trying to be honest with yourself and reflect and say, okay, what is an emergency? What is an emergency? And just, being responsible with the money that you have, and when you choose to tap that emergency fund, is not always easy. You're gonna have to tell yourself no at times, but you'll be thankful in the event that you do run into an emergency that you had something set aside for yourself. Kind of on that similar note, when we talk about being able to sacrifice and thinking through what you need, what's an emergency, what's not, that's where needs and the wants kind of come into play. And I always love asking people this question of like, hey, what's the difference between needs and wants? Because they try to make it a lot more difficult than what it really is. And I always love trying to hear them navigate it. But at the end of the day, needs are things that we need, and wants are things that we want. We don't have to get it more complicated than that. Needs are things that we need to survive. So that's food, that's shelter, that's clothing, utilities, you name it. Anything that you need to survive, that's what a need is. Whereas on the flip side, that's where the wants come in. So wants make life a little bit more enjoyable, a little bit more fun. There's nothing wrong with wants, but they aren't needed. So this would be things like, expensive clothes, maybe an apartment that you can't afford, maybe it's going out to eat all the time, different things like that, where, again, just at the end of the day, yeah, they make life fun and enjoyable and cool, but do we need them at the end of the day? No, we do not. And I understand that's always, tough to navigate and think through, but that's, one of those good decisions to start to think it through. So being able to identify your needs and then starting to save up for the things that you want. Because there's nothing wrong with wanting to have nice things. Don't get me wrong on that. I think if you can manage the needs that you have and start saving up money for things that you want, that's a good approach with it. And I don't think that you'll hear me say anything negatively about that. But if you're compromising your needs consistently, you're not able to meet your needs because you're always buying things that you want, that's a whole nother story. And that's where things of the spending habits kind of come into play. So when you look at this slide, I know it's kind of like in your face a little bit about 16 habits that will make you poor. When you look at each of the different examples, I'm sure that there's probably some that maybe you can relate to, of things that maybe you yourself like to indulge in. So maybe you like to go out to eat, or maybe you like to get coffee from Starbucks a few times a week, or you have a credit card that you keep buying things with. Although on the surface level, maybe there's nothing wrong with those. But when you look at it and you look at the pattern behind it and how frequently you're doing it, that's where kind of the issue arises. So that's kind of the point I'm trying to hit with is, at the end of the day, if you are consistently spending a lot of money on going out to eat, or getting all these subscriptions to Netflix and Hulu and all these things that you don't really need, or you're buying lottery tickets, or maybe sports gambling's big now, so maybe you're putting a bunch of money in there. You might not think that there's anything wrong with it, but then when you would sit down and you would add up and look through it, you're like, oh, I'm actually putting a lot of my hard-earned money into these things where I'm struggling to get by day, but I guess I just looked and realized I'm spending a couple $100s of food a month. So different things like that you'll start to realize as you would look at your habits and hopefully try to make behavior changes going forward, as you are trying to improve your financial wellness as a whole. Now, to try and bring that point home, I pulled up this little learning module, kind of. It was from the Rocket Financial Wellness Center. You can actually find it online at the little link that's there in the middle of the screen. So it's online through Huntington Bank in our partnership with them. But this shows, if an individual was getting 2 coffees a week, they're going out to eat twice, maybe they're taking an Uber once a week. At the bottom it shows that breakdown of how much per week, how much per month, and how much that is per year. I don't drink coffee, so I don't know if that's expensive or not for coffee. I know with fast food nowadays, a lot of fast food is a lot more expensive than $6.75, but you see, all that totals up to $1,334.40. So quite a bit of money when you look at it that way, of like, wow, I'm investing a lot of my money into that area of my life. Then when you would look at this screen, so if we just drop it down by 1, so we get 1 less coffee a week, 1 less time, eating fast food a week. Instead of Ubering, we ask if somebody can take us there, or we walk around. You see that, that's now we're only spending like $11 a week, and $43, almost $44 a month, and $523 a year. By just dropping that down by once each category, we saved over $800 a year. And if you sat down, if you look through where you're spending your money, how it's being used and such, there's lots of different areas that you could probably improve on. And I think that you can use these modules online to try and walk through different scenarios and such, and how it could help you out, what could hurt you, what's harming you, so on and so forth. But it's kind of shocking at times to realize how much money is being spent in different areas of our lives that we could use elsewhere if we really wanted to. And I know what maybe some of you are thinking is, well, geez, Marty, like, do you just want me to never have any fun? You just want me to sit at home all day and not spend any of my money? I would love to say that you could do that and that would be a good time. But I know for some people that's not doable, and they want to be able to do things and hang out with friends in their free time and so on and so forth. And that's what this is about. So maybe take a screenshot of this or a picture. This is just some ideas for free and or cheap entertainment in and around the area. Whether you're in Toledo, maybe eventually go elsewhere. Just some ideas to try and find free and cheap things to do, I think, is always a really good idea. I remember when I was in school, that was something I did frequently, and even now, being a couple years removed at this point, it's still something that I try to find whatever. I'm someone who really likes doing like recreational activities, which are typically speaking free. So it's a good way for me to have fun while also doing it in a really inexpensive manner. So definitely something I'd recommend doing, just trying to find free or cheap things to do. Now, with that stuff out of the way, what we're going to transition to is kind of what I like to say is the meat of this presentation, and that's talking about budgets. If you look up at the screen, so a budget is a written plan for your money designed to prevent overspending. I personally believe that a budget is the single most important financial tool that any individual can use. I think that people who use these can tell you the benefits of them and how it helps them, make smarter decisions with their money. They do a better job of managing what they have coming in, and making smarter decisions going forward. I also want to point out that one of the neat things, in my opinion, about a budget is that within reason, there's not a right or wrong way to do it. So there's a lot of different methods and styles and techniques. I personally believe that as long as somebody is able to create something that works for them and it's a responsible use of their funds, that's what's most important. I'm going to give you all, a couple of examples and techniques and such, but ultimately what I think is best is that you just use one and that you're able to meet the things that need to be taken care of, while hopefully also building in a little bit room for those things that you want as well. So when you'd be starting off, probably what's a good idea to do is to list your income. So trying to figure out how much money you have coming in, how much money is coming in specifically after tax. That way you know specifically what you had to work with, and then estimating and or specifically identifying what your expenses are. So being able to list things like your rent, your groceries, maybe it's medical things, whatever it might be, just being able to list through those different expenses, and that way you can kind of see how you're going to be able to cover them. At the beginning of the month, typically it's going to be an estimate. So then the most important thing throughout the course of the month and over time is to just track your spending, and to try and make sure that you are documenting in some way, shape, or form when you're spending your money, how it's fitting into your budget, just so you can be mindful of what you're working with, how much you have left, and to hopefully avoid overspending. That's where you're going to learn from your spending patterns. So being able to identify, oh, I'm spending a lot of money on coffee this month. Maybe next month I try to adjust it. Or, hey, I've been going out to eat too frequently. I've been buying too many clothes. Whatever it is, you're going to be able to learn where you're spending your money and hopefully be able to make adjustments as needed over time. And that's the thing. So I still, to this day, even though it's been a few years of a budget and it's pretty similar each month, sometimes things shift, different expenses pop up, so we adjust, or maybe we want more in one category next month than we did this month. So things are going to change. It's going to be kind of fluid to an extent, but hopefully as you learn what works for you, you get a plan that works, and one that helps you accomplish whatever financial goals that you are trying to accomplish. One of the most popular and also kind of basic budget methods out there is the 50-30-20 rule. So the way this budget style works is it takes 50% of your income towards your needs, 30% of it towards your wants, and 20% of it goes towards savings, as well as minimum debt payments. So for someone who's just starting off, I think this is always a good starting point. It's kind of no way around determining what's a need, what's a want, what's savings, what's debt. All those categories are pretty set in stone, although some people can kind of take liberties here and there. But I think when you're starting off with the budget, this is a good starting point. So being able to say, okay, my needs are things like my housing and utilities, whatever it is. Wants are things like going out to eat or buying clothes, or maybe I want to go on a trip, whatever it might be. So just trying to break it down in those categories, and then over that month, you're just able to see, okay, how am I doing? Am I good here on the 50%? How am I doing on my savings? Whatever it might be, you're just able to kind of keep in touch with it and make good decisions kind of going forward. If you're someone who likes to look at things to get a better idea of how they work and such, let's say that this individual, she has her monthly income after taxes is for $1,800. So if we were breaking that down, we would say 50% of it is $900 is going towards her needs. And then she would take it a step further and say, 540 is going towards her wants, and then finally we would have 360 of it is going towards her savings and whatever minimum debt that she would have. So that's what she would establish at the beginning of the month, and then over that course of that month, then she's just working to try and make sure that she is staying under those thresholds for each category. If she spent a little bit too much on those needs that month, then she would have to kind of adjust on the fly and maybe reduce those wants, or vice versa. That's the thing with budgets, is they're kind of fluid to an extent. So you will likely need to adjust here and there, and that's okay. You're learning, because nobody's going to be perfect at it when they're starting. Nobody's going to be perfect at it in general. So it's just trying to be able to adapt when needed to be able to still maintain that plan and making sure that you aren't spending more than what you actually have available. Now, this other strategy, which really isn't a budget strategy or method on its own, it's more so just like a component that could be intertwined, is called the 4 walls. So that's, think like a foundation, think like a house. So that's taking care of shelter, utilities, food, and transportation. And the idea is that if you take care of these 4 essential things, then you can kind of also throw in and add in those other non-essential items kind of in the middle as well. But making sure that you prioritize the 4 walls is kind of the approach. So when we would look at that kind of in practice, On the next slide, you'll kind of see of how that's incorporated and how it would kind of shake out. So again, when you look at it, you see those four walls of shelter, utilities, food, transportation. And then after you would take care of those, after you would have that foundation set, you're going to start to list and plan for those other needed monthly expenses. So that would be those bills that absolutely have to be paid. So maybe it's insurance, maybe it's internet, minimum debt, different things like that that absolutely need to be taken care of. And then if there's still that margin, you're then trying to incorporate things that you want. So maybe that's clothes, maybe it's entertainment, restaurants, whatever it might be. Those are kind of the secondary things that are to be taken care of because you already have that foundation set. Then you've already taken care of some of those needed things, and then you're trying to see what margin you have to be able to purchase those things that you want, or maybe those are the things that you ultimately have to sacrifice for. When we look at an example here, you would see, somebody's four walls, their shelter, utilities, food, transportation, that all totals up to $1,700. So then they take it a step further, and they add up the other expenses that you are responsible for, that you need to take care of, and you're going to include those. So maybe that person figures out, okay, I have $300 in other expenses, so my total expenses for the month are $2,000. So that's $2,000 I know that I'm going to spend for the month, and ideally you are sticking below that number or at that number instead of spending more than that, because if you're overspending, that means something that budget's not working, and then you're going to have to readjust those behaviors and make decisions kind of going forward. So the idea is that you're working to track it, you're trying to stick to that plan the best that you can. Maybe you have to adjust some areas. Maybe you spent too much on utilities. Your bill was a little bit higher than what it was initially thought to be. So maybe you have to adjust your food a little bit. Maybe your transportation cost drops. Whatever it is, you're just making adjustments kind of as you're going to be able to stick to that plan that you set. So let's look at an example that might hit a little bit closer to home. If you're a student, a grad student who lives off of the financial aid refund that you're getting. So if I cannot stress this enough, if your main source of income while you're in school is a loan refund, you need to make sure that you are planning and that you are budgeting for the future. So you're not just thinking about today or tomorrow, but you are thinking months, maybe even years in advance, trying to make sure that you are positioning yourself in the best possible way that you can. So being able to take care of those four walls and being then responsible with what's left, I think is a really good starting point. And that's kind of what we'll walk through together. But again, if that refund is your main source of income, which for a lot of students it seems like that's the case, you just need to make sure that you're responsible with it. You need to make sure that you're planning properly and that you are sitting down and walking through it. I understand that for some people that these next couple of slides probably aren't going to be relevant, or maybe some of the details are a little bit skewed and such. What I would recommend is that you take the time to talk with someone. I would love to be able to sit down with any of you to kind of walk through your personal situation, and I think that's probably how you would benefit the most if you could kind of see how this would look for you, and maybe we come up with a whole different idea. But at the end of the day, you need to make sure that you are planning and you are thinking ahead for the future, and you're saving money to be able to make sure that you're not just spending it all kind of as you get it. My understanding is that refunds, they're going to vary from student to student. So maybe your estimated refund for the summer is $10,000, but then in the fall and in the spring you only get $2,500. So you want to make sure that you are planning ahead properly to make sure that you can handle those expenses, because if you get $10,000 in the summer, you got to be able to stretch that out. You got to make sure that you can make it last long enough to help you get through that year, while also replenishing partially when you get that fall refund, when you get that spring refund, so on and so forth. If you were someone who spent all that summer refund, that would leave you in a really tough situation for the rest of that year, because those replenishments you get, those other refunds in the fall and spring, typically speaking, my understanding is they aren't nearly as much as that summer one for a lot of people. But again, I think what's best is that you are thinking ahead, you're planning, and again, if this situation isn't relevant for you, or you can't relate to it as much, I would love to be able to chat, to be able to kind of see your particular scenario and how we can kind of come up with something together to be able to help you be best served. So bear with me here on this example, okay? So let's say your student was living off that refund, and when you look at it, your four walls, they total up to $1,000 a month. And then you look at some of those other expenses and you're like, okay, it's gonna be $200 a month. So that's gonna bring your total monthly expenses to $1,200. Your refund for that summer, let's say it was $10,000. So in May, June, July, and August, you spend $1,200 each, which would be $4,800 that you spent of that initial refund. So you're then left with $5,200 when you get that fall refund for $2,500. So after you made it through 4 months, you're starting off that fall semester then with $7,700 that's still able to be used because you've spread out enough and then you got replenished a little bit. Same thing then happens, September, October, November pass, you end up spending $4,800 and you're left with $2,900 to close out that calendar year. But then January rolls around, so you get that spring refund. Then maybe you've spent another $1,200. Then, so when it's all said and done, maybe this was your last semester of school, so you're getting ready to graduate. Maybe you're getting ready to repeat it. Regardless, you'd be left with $600. So I understand that this example might not be relevant for some people. Maybe you look and you're like, only spending $1,200 a month, like I don't even think that that's possible. I can promise you that it is possible on one hand. At the same time, again, I think it'd be just much more helpful if you can't connect with this as much, just be able to sit down together, either in person, phone call, whatever it might be, and just kind of look at your personal situation and how it could kind of work and what we can kind of come up with to get you to a point where you're able to stretch out whatever money that you have to be able to get it to last you however long you need it to last you at the end of the day. Again, this is just an example. I understand that for some people this isn't relevant, it's not relatable, but it's a way to think and to get you thinking about, okay, the importance of being able to save that money and not spend it all. That way you can make sure that you are covered throughout the duration of the year when you're already busy with so many other things that you don't have margin in your life to work a typical job or something like that. Beyond that, I think what's always really good to do is to try and find ways in your life that you can save money. So when I think of budget hacks, what I always like to recommend is that students just try and get creative with how they're saving money. So, being able to use apps that will give you cash back, I think is a good place to start. I still use them to this day. Trying when you go grocery shopping to make sure that you are shopping at a place that's not expensive. Maybe you sacrificed and you aren't getting the big name brands. Maybe you're getting the store generic brands, things like that, using coupons, whatever it might be. One useful tip I had heard is, spreading out the due dates of monthly bills. Maybe it is taking advantage of free or reduced internet programs. I think if you're someone who is in college and you're paying for internet at like your apartment or house, wherever you're living, there's a really good chance that you would qualify for free internet. To take a step further, there's probably a good chance that you could qualify for like meal assistance, if not just taking advantage of the rocket fuel pantry that's on campus. So just making sure that you're planning all that kind of stuff out. And I think a really fantastic way to save money, although some people don't love having other people in their space, is getting a roommate. I think if you can get a roommate, you're splitting your rent and costs. Maybe you're splitting groceries and costs. Maybe you're commuting together. You're just able to find a lot of ways to save money because you are splitting it with another individual. I think that's always a really good place to start, in my opinion. I also wanted to make sure that I provided you all with just different resources that you can use. So when you're making your budget, maybe you're someone who likes to write it down. Maybe you're someone who wants to put it in your phone, Excel spreadsheets, whatever it is. All of these resources here that are listed are apps that are available to you, online. So being able to use those on your phone, I think, is always really useful because most people have their phone on them the majority of the time. So to be able to right away input whatever you spent into the app, I think it is a good way to kind of hold yourself accountable and make sure that you are tracking what you are spending. That way you don't forget to put it in. Another step, and I've said it once, I'll say it a bunch of times. I would love to be able to help any of you make a budget. So if you ever wanted to schedule an appointment with me, at the end there'll be a slide with my contact information in which you can do so. But yeah, being able to take advantage of free resources that are available online, I think is always a really good idea to kind of help you start this financial journey. As we start to wrap up here, then I just wanted to leave you kind of with this quote. So you can either control your finances or have your finances control you. When you look at that, I think a lot of people, especially when they're younger, let their finances kind of dictate their lifestyles, and maybe they try to ignore it, or maybe they're really aware of it and they just don't care. But I think the sooner you start to try and take control of it, the sooner you start to understand, being able to make smart financial decisions, I truly believe that the better off that you'll be. So being able to have a plan for those immediate needs while also trying to make sure that the lifestyle that you're living is sustainable, the budget that you're creating is sustainable. That way you can make sure that you're meeting things in the future as well, is always a plus in my eyes. And I'll leave this side up briefly if anyone wants to take advantage of some of the financial resources that are available, across campus, or just kind of online, of things that I know that I myself personally reference a lot. So being able to get help is something a lot of people don't always want to admit, especially when it comes to money. But I think the sooner you realize that people are here to help you and they want to serve you, and they understand that a lot of people struggle with being able to make smart decisions with their money, I think the better off you'll be if you can just kind of, right hand up, say, hey, I need help. I don't know where to start, and I just kind of, want to do better in this area. And that's really kind of any field in general. But definitely when it comes to money, there's so many people across campus and in the community that would be more than willing to help you all out. Well, hey, it's my hope that you all found this beneficial. If you ever want to reach out to me, you can scan that QR code on the screen. You can see my contact information for my office, email, phone number. Again, my name is Marty. If you ever want to reach out, again, I would love to be able to work with anyone to be able to just help you figure things out. Maybe it's just general questions. Maybe you don't even want to make a budget, but you just have general questions about money. I'd be more than happy to sit down and kind of help you walk through as you try and navigate those questions. Again, at the end of the day, when it comes to money, there's no right or wrong answer within reason. So just trying to do what makes the most amount of sense for now as well as the future, I think is what's great. And just be able to have a point where you're starting off, you're trying to make good decisions. That's a win in my eyes. So I would love to be able to chat at any point. So feel free to reach out again. And I hope to talk to some of you soon. Thank you.